Welcome to another episode of Fresh Waves. I'm your host, Bren Masson. Today, we are really happy to be talking to somebody who is a Canadian expat living in Panama. Hello, Lyndi.
Hi, Brenda. Good to talk to you tonight.
It's wonderful to talk to you. I'm so happy to be talking to somebody who is in a warm climate. How is it down there? What's the temperature like?
Well, today it's about 30 degrees and sunny and breezy. If you hung your laundry on the line, it would be dry in 20 minutes.
Wow, that's amazing. We're going to be talking today about writing, and we've done quite a few episodes in our writing series, and you are an author, you're a writer, you're a writing workshop facilitator in the AWA method, and you've been published in newspapers and magazines and things like that. How did you get interested in writing?
Well, I think way back when I was in high school, I wrote a story once, and my teacher told me I did a good job, and that actually stayed with me. So when I had my family and I was off work for a little while, I started exploring some writing on my own, and I submitted a few pieces to some newspapers and magazines, and eventually online, because I started writing before that was a possibility. And a few of those, articles or how-to pieces or what to do with kids, those kinds of things got published, and it gave me a little bit of confidence to explore writing a little bit more. I'm a little bit of a late bloomer, so I went to university late, and I took a creative writing course. And I was writing in a method that the teacher used that was used by quite a popular Canadian author at that time. And we had to produce so much writing. But out of that came many, many story ideas that I've been exploring actually over the years since then.
Oh, that sounds really cool. Now, you're a teacher. Is that correct?
Yes, I was a high school teacher. I taught in Durham region for a number of years, both in high school and also in continuing education, teaching high school to adults who were coming back to upgrade or finish up so that they could move on with their education. And that gave me an opportunity to teach creative writing. It was by far my favorite class to teach, and also in my English classroom. I remember a plumber asking me one time, why am I going to need to learn to write stories? And I said, well, if you come to my house one day when I call you as a plumber, you better be able to tell me a good story when you're there. And he actually turned out to be a pretty good storyteller. So I had lots of fun with my students in teaching writing, and some of them have gone on to explore that as careers. So that's pretty exciting.
That is very exciting, and it says something for the teacher. As you were mentioning, one teacher said to you once that your writing was good, and we often forget how influential teachers are. I always wanted to be a teacher, and then I had a guidance teacher who was, I think, a little disgruntled with the education system back in the late 70s, and he told me, of all the things you could ever do not ever, ever become a teacher. And
yeah,
he changed my mind.
Yeah, that's unfortunate. But, in getting to know you a little bit, Brenda, you are a teacher, maybe not in the formal sense of in the school system, the formal education, but, I've had opportunities to write with you as well. And I've certainly learned from you and your writing and what you've shared in the writing group. So
thank you.
He may have squashed the career, but he didn't squash the teacher.
Thanks. So what got you interested? You were writing, you were doing things, writing stuff down all the time, and you decided to become an AWA facilitator.
Amherst Writers and Artists.
Tell us a little bit about that philosophy and how you got attracted to that.
Well, I started as a participant. There's a very excellent participant. There's a very excellent facilitator in Durham. Her name's Sue Reynolds, and I attended some of her writing workshops. And I was really pleased with how the whole philosophy upholds the same values that I do. And that is that, everyone is a writer, and everyone has their own unique voice that needs to be upheld and appreciated and encouraged. And everyone is treated with, the same respect, regardless of education or socioeconomic status. Every person's writing is honored. And we take time to listen to what writers are saying, and we share with them what's working in the piece. And, that's, quite a bit different than, we're required to say in a regular classroom where, we're to mark for certain things and mark what's done incorrectly. This philosophy really focuses on what's working in the piece. And in doing so, when I identify, say, what's working in your piece, you learn what you are doing well and you continue to do that. If someone else identifies what's working well in my piece, and maybe you haven't written that into your piece, you suddenly realize, hey, I could start incorporating that into my writing as well. And so through this positive reinforcement, people learn to improve their craft. And many of the writing prompts focus on various aspects of craft. And so the group can be focused on areas where they need some learning, whether it be on character or setting or, descriptive writing with the 5 senses. And there's this whole spirit of, writing together, learning together, and growing together. And quite often we just become great friends because, we learn so much about one another in that environment. It's just a great, safe community to write in.
Yeah, it seems to me that it's a nice way to express ourselves. I'm an expressive arts practitioner, so I use the arts, not just writing, but all of the arts, to enhance self-expression. And the thing I love about the AWA method of writing is the self-expression that comes through it without judgment, because sometimes it's so hard to express ourselves. We've just come through a pandemic. I shouldn't say that. It's almost like jinxing it, isn't it? We seem to have come through a pandemic, and we're getting to the better side of the pandemic, so to speak. Now we're talking in Toronto about entering a third wave, but I don't want to go there. But during this time, there are times in our day when we're supporting the people around us, whether they're family and friends, whoever, and we're trying to put that brave face on, and maybe we're a little more nervous or anxious than we care to let on. But in writing, we can let it all go onto the page, can't we?
Yes, absolutely. And I saw that with my students. I became certified in the method because I appreciated it so much as a participant. And I had students, who had come from war zones and who, shared, some, pretty extreme and traumatic circumstances. And they were able to write about that, share that with the classroom, have people listen with great care and respond to the piece. And it's not therapy, but it can be very cathartic to be involved in it. Mm-hmm. And, I can still remember some of the words of my students that they shared in the classroom. That's how, poignant and how powerful they were. They've stayed with me all through these years. I could repeat them to you, but you're not allowed to. That's part of the process.
Yeah.
We keep all the writing in the classroom or in the setting so that people know their work stays in that workshop environment and no one's going to talk about it outside of that. And so, it's just another way of honoring and keeping safe what's being said and written about. Mm-hmm. So when I retired from teaching, I took the AWA method with me to Panama. It was in my opinion, the best part of my teaching experience. And it became part of my dream in setting up my business here. And as a result, I've been able to share the method with people who have lived from, 20 different countries or more. There are many expats in my area. Some of them have lived in several countries. Many of them are well-traveled. Many of them, like all people, have had, rich life experiences to write about. And it's been a great learning experience. It helps me to appreciate, all cultures and all peoples. And, I really feel that I have a unique opportunity to grow from what they are sharing with me with their writing. But that's one part of the business that is here. We also operate a writing retreat. And that means people can come and stay in our casita. A casita is our little house. And we get a wide variety of writers. We try to cater the experience to what their needs are as writers. They might come and squirrel away in the room and shut the door and just write away because they need a quiet space, uninterrupted, so that they can get their writing done. Sometimes they become fully involved in the writing community that we have established here by joining in the AWA workshops and exchanging work for critique. Often they will come to our writing tours. So writing tours are when we go to natural spaces here in Panama, like waterfalls or by the beach, and we write together in these natural spaces. There's something about nature that opens all of the senses, our hearing, our smell, and sound, and it inspires the writing. And so it's a lot of fun to go to some of Panama's very, very beautiful spaces and write together. And in some ways, I think that's when I do my very best writing.
It sounds wonderful.
And then the other aspect that we have here is an editor named Lisa Bay and we established a group here called Write Along. Now, this was inspired by previous writing communities that I had been part of. The writing communities were very strong, and I really missed being a part of them when I moved away. And so there being a number of writers here, some of them brand new writers who haven't started to write, others who had been writing for a while, some published, some more on the marketing side of producing books, and publishing books. And so we pulled together all of these people, and we started this group to inspire and encourage and educate people in the area. And, for quite a while, we had just the local speakers here to share with the group. And, there's something really powerful about sharing your own personal journey with someone because it's your lived life. And while it may not work out the same way for everyone, there's always something that we can learn from someone else's journey. And so they have, shared with us on all topics about writing. And many of our retreat participants attend those as well. And then I just find there is such rich conversation around the meal table, and whether if we're walking the beach, as the sun rises or sets, or with the sand between our toes, just talking about our writing journeys. There's something just very tangible, and and putting your feet on the ground and smelling the ocean air and hearing the rhythm of the ocean waves that brings out the best in people's writing. And so I consider myself, very fortunate to take the things that I love to a place that I love, and invite people to, to join in and experience those things.
It sounds wonderful. I mean, it sounds like you have a beautiful thing going on there in Panama. How did you come to live in Panama, since you were talking about the fact that you were working in Durham region, and this podcast is produced just outside of Stouffville in Ballantrae, Ontario. How did you come from living in this beautiful area here to living in the beautiful area you live down in Panama?
Well, as you so rightly addressed, weather is a big factor in where we live. And if you have ever met my husband, Lowell, you would understand how much he detests the cold and the snow. And I can remember from even before we were married over 40 years ago, he talked about when he retired, he was going to retire somewhere where the weather was hot. And I didn't mind the cold weather. So I thought, okay, when it comes to our retirement years, it'll be his turn to choose where we live in an area that he likes the weather. And so over the last few years, we did some traveling. We traveled in Europe and, in different places in the Caribbean. A number of years ago, 2 of our adult children moved here to Panama.
Really?
And so, we would contact them, maybe September, October, and say, hey, are you coming home for Christmas? And they'd go, what? Are you kidding? Why would we come home to all that cold and snow? You come here. And so my husband and I would meet them in various locations in Panama. So we got to know the country quite well. We got to, go boating from island to island in Bocas del Toro and San Blas. We got to experience the cooler weather of the mountains, like in Boquete. My husband put Exnay on that as a place to live because he was going for the heat. And, we got to spend some time in the Azuero Peninsula and the Dry Arc and the beaches. And that is what my husband loved. And so after about 7 or 8 visits here, Panama really started to feel like this was a good potential place for retirement and also for us to set up the business that we had hoped to. And we started checking out the real estate here. And, we were looking for certain things because it wasn't just a home. We were looking for a place where, people could come and write and we could hold workshops. And the minute my husband stepped into the backyard of the place we now call home here, he whispered to me and he just said, Linda, I am home. And we made a purchase and I retired right away from teaching and came down to Panama myself to close the house deal in Spanish.
Wow.
And buy a car and do a few renovations so that it could be set up for what we needed. And then my husband retired 8 or 9 months later and joined me here, and it was ready to go. So, our home was, almost turnkey, and I just rolled my 2 suitcases in, sold everything in Canada, put everything I needed into 2 suitcases. Most of that was books on writing.
Wow.
And I wheeled those suitcases in, and someone said to me, how long did it take to settle in? I said, about 20 minutes. And, this is now very much our home here. And it's been, a little bit of a learning experience. Well, maybe a lot of a learning experience. But, the culture is different. We're the foreigners here, and we needed to make some adjustments. Many of them were good adjustments. In Canada, we worked way too much and volunteered a lot, and we were feeling a little bit, run down and ragged. And then coming here, the way of life is much slower. And we were able to slow down, get some rest, and, begin to take the steps to open the business and market it. And it's been a really good experience for us. We have great opportunities for walking and hiking, and there's so much great fresh fruit and vegetables and all the things that are, helping us to eat a healthy diet. And, we had to adjust some of our thinking, when you go to a restaurant here, the service is not the same as you would have in Canada. People linger. And we had to learn things like they will never bring you La Cuenta, your bill, if you don't ask for it. They're not rushing you out. They just expect you're enjoying yourself and you're not ready to go until, you request the bill.
Isn't that funny?
And, we learn to appreciate and love how the families gather here. There's such a strong sense of family. And, it was a little bit of a language barrier. And sometimes, things would get lost in the translation. So we're improving our Spanish. I can remember a year ago, I asked, for like a, keto haircut, like as in just a little trim, a little bit. And it got lost in the translation, and she gave me just a little bit of hair. So it got super short, and it was poquito hair, a very little bit. And so, we're developing our language skills a little bit more. And it's giving us, more opportunities to meet Panamanians because we live in a community about an hour and a half outside the city. And like I mentioned, there are a lot of expats here, and we, mostly speak English. But we're living in a country that's Spanish speaking. And so embracing the culture and enjoying, some of their festival activities and their way of life. They taught us many good things that are, very good for us. So Panama definitely was the right choice for us. Even like you were talking about the pandemic, which, shut down our retreat participants coming here. It was a decision we made to stay here, even though the Prime Minister was telling, Canadians to come home. We're like, well, we are home. We're in our home. And, that was a good opportunity for me to get quiet and get my own writing done. And so this past year has been about me, pursuing the longer works of writing that I would like to do. And I know you asked, when did you start writing? I'm now writing a story that I was inspired to write many years ago when I was at a summer camp for children and youth. And many of the children were children of inmates and from foster homes and had experienced various trauma and losses. But one of the things that they loved to do was to stargaze. And so we would build a fire and we would camp out under the stars. And there was something about that experience that would open the kids up to be able to talk about their trauma and loss. And I would listen. In some ways, I felt a little bit inadequate in knowing how to respond to them. But since I found writing and storytelling helps me process my life circumstances, I decided to write a story that might help teens process their grief. And so I started what I called my Summer Triangle Trilogy. And the first book in the trilogy, The Lines Between Our Stars, is forthcoming and will be released on March 31st of this year. I'm pretty excited about it.
We have to take a little break here at the station, and when we come back, we'll continue our discussion with Lyndi Allison. We are talking about writing this morning, publishing, self-publishing, and the launch of her new and exciting book. We'll be back right after this. Stay tuned. We're back on Fresh Waves. I'm your host, Bren Masson, and this morning we're talking to Lyndi Allison of Panama. And are you, when you said you were outside of the city, are you outside of Panama City?
Yes, about an hour and a half drive. So, like, our area is a little bit like cottage country would be.
Nice.
And
Except you're on an ocean.
yes, well, we're about a 15-minute walk to the ocean, but it's definitely worth the walk.
Oh, I bet it is. I've actually seen pictures, and it just looks beautiful there. So you said earlier that you get a lot of your inspiration for your writing from nature and from, the beautiful natural things around you. Yet your book that you're about to release is science fiction.
Yes.
So
yes,
could you tell us a
definitely.
bit about how you get the science fiction element out of the nature around you?
Well, I still think of stargazing as nature, and so
It is,
I'm
yeah.
I'm kind of fascinated by the stars and the constellations and the constellation stories. And the myths around the constellations actually play into my story. And one of the things about writing for teens, is that they like to go to other places. And so the characters in my book, they actually go to another planet to rescue this baby dragon snake, where they have a lot of adventures and they're challenged by the planet's landscape. So, that's just nature, but in a different form on a different planet. And
Okay.
so,
And you said that the books help teens to process grief and trauma and things like that. So how does that science fiction help in that regard?
well, in some ways, science fiction is escapism literature, but also a character, Jace, who's this astronomy geek, and Gloria, who is artsy. They kind of have this conflict because of their different ways of viewing the world. They are both grieving. Jace has lost his baby sister, and Gloria, her father. And we see how, their grief and sometimes anger affects their relationship. And they have to, really work through some of that grief to deal with the elements on the planet, and also to overcome this kind of formidable foe that they have to come against in order to rescue this child. And so, I'm hoping that as they work through their grief together and find, kind of strategies that work, and sometimes dialogue, about what they're experiencing, that teens who experience that will be able to identify with that, and maybe find something in the story that will be helpful in terms of them processing their own grief and moving forward through their own struggles. That we all carry certain things with us, and then we also have these life circumstances, and so often it's those two things that come together where we learn our best lessons. And not that this is a didactic book in any sense. I'm just hoping to tell a really good story that they can relate to, and that's helpful to them.
And so you had this in your head. Now you say it's the first of a trilogy. Did you have all three stories in your head when you began writing?
Yes, it actually started. I thought it was going to be one book. And as soon as I, talked to my creative writing teacher, they said, "Oh no, you've got 3 books here," because the teens actually planet hop to different planets, 3 different planets. So there's an asterism called the Summer Triangle, and it has 3 bright stars. And each of the stories occurs around on planets around these bright stars. And so she immediately identified that it was 3 books. And the second book is in process. It's called The Bridges Between Us. And the third book is untitled. It's in process as well. I really like how, the titles and the experience of stargazing and joining the lines between the stars also speaks to how the teens struggle to make connections. And, that's sort of an underlying, message in the book as well. How when we have different points of view, and we see things so differently, how can we come together and bring those two things to be beneficial and helpful to one another? And I kind of think, in this last year that's been a little more than a little wonky and a little bit crazy, and not just in terms of COVID, but say in terms of politics and other things. And in some ways, people have been outspoken and diametrically opposed on certain issues. But, in some ways it's a timely story because they do see things differently, and yet they're able to make connections and come together and be the better for it. It's not something that divides them. It's something that ultimately brings them together.
So did you do the tried and trusted route of getting your manuscript together, sending it to 45 different publishers, getting 44 different rejection letters and all the rest of that stuff? Or did you go right to self-publishing?
Well, that's something that I took a long time to consider. So, while we were having this COVID shutdown, I took a few courses online, and I listened to over 100 webinars on writing and editing and publishing and self-publishing and the pros and the cons. And there were certain webinars that stood out to me. And one of the ones that stood out to me talked about, the pros and cons of traditional versus self-publishing. And they talked about the kind of person who self-publishes. And in many ways, I felt that they were describing me, someone who likes to have creative control, someone who likes to create and implement business plans. That sounded like me. So my plan was to self-publish, and then I kind of took a side route for a bit. I went to a writing conference, and I thought, maybe I should just explore traditional a little bit first before I self-publish. Just kind of put it out there and see where it goes. And, I didn't put it out to a lot of publishers and agents. I did put it out to some. A few of them I never heard from. A few I was very fortunate, and I got written feedback with suggestions for my story. And it was at that point I became a little bit confused because I was getting a little bit of conflicting information. So one person was saying, you need to do more world building so that the reader feels grounded. And then the other person was saying, you need to take out some of your world building so you don't slow down the... And I'm like, okay, now I'm feeling a little confused, right?
And rightly so.
I was very fortunate, though. Out of that conference, I got to interview a great author by the name of Jonas Saul, and he writes thrillers, and he's written over 30 books and has a wide audience. He experienced 10 years of rejections and then went on to self-publish his books. And, he writes from Greece. How hard is that to take, right? And so, I got to hear his story. And then I went on Facebook sites kind of follow with writers groups to follow them a little bit. And there's one called Canada Writes. And there was an author on there. Her pen name is Ray Knightley, and she was having success with her self-published The Alien Skills series, which is a fabulous middle grade series of 6 books. And I contacted her, and she gave me an interview for my blog and shared her experiences. So that renewed where I had come to before, that maybe I needed to self-publish. And, those two authors really confirmed for me my decision. And not that the, feedback I got was entirely wrong. I did need to go through another edit before I self-published. So it wasn't like I didn't listen to them at all, but I needed someone who was interested in helping me develop my own unique voice, because that's part of what I teach and part of who I am, and helped me to write my best story. And Ray Knightley referred me to someone who walked me through one more edit, and then I felt, okay, now I'm ready to self-publish, and I started to take those additional steps and invest in a way. You don't just self-publish. Like, I know we say, okay, we self-publish our book, but in a way, we actually become a publisher, and we're taking on some of those roles, right?
Right.
So it was a great learning experience for me. And I mean, I don't know how this book will do, but I can tell you, I absolutely delighted in self-publishing and the creative process.
Well,
and
now that you're self-publishing, I can see that there's different elements of self-publishing. There's, I've seen self-published works that only go online. I've seen self-published works that have a hand-drawn or a photograph on the cover and not such a great binding process where, you open the book and the middle pages fall out. So there's different things that you want to spend money on. And I think, let's start at the beginning. What was the first thing that you wanted to spend your money on when you were going to be self-publishing? Was it an editor?
Yes, absolutely. And that's the guidance these two previous authors shared with me. Spend your money on your editor and spend your money on a good book cover, because if your book cover doesn't, grab the reader's attention, they won't even check your book to see if it's worth reading. Mm-hmm. And editing, clarity is really, really important, and we as writers have, way more information that's actually in the story in our heads as we're reading. And, editors, they tell you where it's lacking clarity, and, they're very, very helpful to the process. But I would suggest for an editor process, John Nassau gave me this advice, and it was very good advice. And that is, when you have an editor, ask them for a test edit. So, you send them your first chapter, and then they provide you feedback on your first chapter. And then you see if they're the right fit for you. And, I was able to do that with a few editors, and I definitely found the person who was the right fit for me. Christy Watson, she actually writes for Orca, but she does edits as well. And she's also writing in my genre. So she's writing science fiction young adult book now as well. And she also knew language, in terms of what language for reading levels. And so, she was definitely the right editor for me. But, you might try, 2 or 3 to see, who is the fit for you. And I recommend in your genre too, because there are nuances of certain genres. And I mean, Christy was great, or she would just laugh at the manuscript because she would get it,
Yeah.
She's a science fiction writer, and it was just a delight to work with her.
Yeah.
And the same for the book cover. Like, I actually created my own book cover first about the concept that I wanted. And then I sent it to Ray Knightley, referred me to her. I was very fortunate. She referred me to her book cover designer. And right from the very first draft, he nailed what I was looking for. And it was just a few minor tweaks. And I've had some great responses to the book cover already. Actually, his book covers make me nervous. I'm worried that people are going to be disappointed when they open up and read the story.
I don't think they will be.
So good. So good. Yes, he did a superb job.
So for the listeners who are thinking of self-publishing, about how much money does it cost to get an average-sized book edited? Is it a massive expense?
Well, it depends. I know that's not a really good answer. It depends because how much editing that you need done. So, and it also depends on the length of your book.
Right.
and I think you can spend a lot of money producing a book, but, I can say to you that I'm publishing my book the end of March, and it cost me just under $1,000 to publish.
Wow.
And that included my editor, my book cover, and my book trailer. And and it included a little bit of a structural editing help I got in the beginning as well to nail the plot of the story. But, I also had a quote from someone who said, for $1,200, they would proofread my book. And I'm like, I produced the whole book for just under $1,000. And I'm actually trying to do this as a fundraiser towards education here in Panama. So I just, I found a few people to proofread it for me, and I kept it to under $1,000. So
yeah.
You don't have to spend a ton of money. You need to find the right people, and you need to write the best book you can to deliver to the editor beforehand, so that you're not paying them to fix something you could fix yourself.
Right. And of course, you had the background being a teacher to be able to do that from the beginning anyway.
Well,
I think that helps, doesn't it?
Well, it probably should have. It just felt a little challenging writing the book. But again, I was a part of strong writing communities. I had a group online who critiqued my work as I wrote.
Oh, that's
and
nice.
I had beta readers who read it for me before I sent it to the editor, so it could be the best. So that when I got to the editor, it didn't cost as much as it would have if I did not have all those people who provided feedback for me along the way. A book is not written in isolation. It's sort of a community of people that produce that.
So what is a beta reader for people out there who don't know book lingo?
So a beta reader is when you have written your book, you've received some feedback on it, and you send the entire book to a reader, and you ask them to provide you with certain feedback. And that feedback can vary. You give them some direction. The kinds of things I asked from my beta readers were, were my characters likable? Did you at any point feel emotional reactions to the characters? Was there any point in the story where it was unclear, where you had to read the paragraphs twice, to get what I was saying? Just flag that, and that just means I need to work on that paragraph a little more. Mm-hmm. Was there anything in the story that threw you out of the story? Any point where the plot, was difficult to follow? And so you just give them a list of criteria, and they read through the book and provide you with that feedback as someone looking at the book for the first time. And then, you have the chance to fix those things up before they go to the editor.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And for me, it was really, adding a few more rich details. And one of my beta readers, Sandy Hernandez, she's actually a hard science fiction writer. So, lots of technology and how it works and stuff like that. And so, even though mine's a little bit softer, science fiction, she said, I still think you need to, just ramp it up a little bit here on the technology pieces. And so I have received some great feedback from them.
That's great. So these people are not necessarily your friends. Your beta readers are not necessarily, your next door neighbor or your cousin's husband.
In my case, my beta readers are now my friends. Actually, I met Sammy through her husband. Roberto comes to my writing workshops. Where he's a songwriter and a musician. And, I met her through them, and she found out I was writing a science fiction book. And she said, I'm an avid science fiction reader. Can I read it? And I said, oh, yeah, definitely. You can read it before I send it to my editor. And so I didn't really know her at that time.
And the second beta reader was kind of later in the process. She's someone I wrote with years ago, and she did a read through, but it was pretty much on its way at that point. So she was, just picking up on anything that we had missed.
Okay. So through this process, was there ever a time where you just felt like you just wanted to pick up the manuscript, throw it in the garbage, and walk away?
Absolutely, more than once. So, my early drafts were very, very poorly written, and I kind of feel badly for those that had to read through and listen to them at the time. But I mean, I've changed my perspective on it since my early writing and my lack of confidence back then. I was a firm believer in Anne Lamott's, write your crappy first drafts. But I've since changed even my vocabulary about that. As much as I really adore Anne Lamott, but I changed it to my perfect first draft, because, your first draft is about you learning the story yourself, and just, for me it is, and getting it out on the page. And then I have something to work with, something to craft. If I never put that on the page, I'll always have a blank page. So in that sense, it's perfect. I got it out there, and now I have something to work with, and that's what first drafts are for. So it's a perfect draft.
You're right. It's so funny, because when I write a first draft, even if it's a poem, I always think, well, it's just perfect. And I walk away, and I come back a few days later, and I look at it and think, what the heck was I thinking? It's an okay first draft, but it's by no means perfect. Tie it in a bow and send it somewhere. No. I could have said this better, or I could have said that better. There are some days where I think, what the heck were you smoking when you wrote this? I mean, it just is awful. But you know what? Out of some of that muck comes some really great stuff.
Absolutely. Out of much of it does, right? And if it wasn't on that page, where would you be beginning? You'd be beginning with the first draft. So,
okay. So now that you've written a book, which makes you an author, this is so exciting. When does your book launch again?
My book launches March 31st, of this year. So the ebook is on pre-order right now, and I'm just waiting for my proof copy to arrive on my paperback, so I can make sure I get all my own formatting. And when it's on the printed page, sometimes you can catch a mistake that you can't on the screen. So I'm just waiting for the proof copy to have a good look at it, to see if anything needs to be tweaked before I hit publish on the paperback copy. So,
wow, this is really exciting, isn't it?
It's so close.
Are you excited?
I'm very excited. Yes, I feel ready to put it out there, and if a few people read it and enjoy it, it will have been worth the journey. So I'm feeling in a good place right now.
I'm so excited about self-publishing in terms of, I honestly think that there are a lot of good manuscripts sitting on a shelf somewhere that some publisher just wasn't into at that particular moment. And self-publishing gives those works an opportunity to be seen and read.
And yes, that's quite often when people receive rejection letters. It's not necessarily that they're a poor writer. It's just that publisher has either recently published something similar, or isn't that's not what they're putting on their list right at that point in time. And so, we don't want to see those stories lost.
Well, we have come to the end of our time, and I know that it goes by so quickly. Thank you so much for being our guest today. Great luck. Good luck with your book. Can you tell everybody once more what it is? I will put it on our Facebook page and our YouTube page when we get the podcast up. So what is the name of the book, and when is it available?
The name of the book is The Lines Between Our Stars. It's on pre-order now, releasing March 31st, 2021.
Perfect. Well, thank you. We have been talking with Lyndi Allison, And I hope everybody has a wonderful Fresh Waves kind of day. Thanks for joining us today. And do tune in every Wednesday evening on Whistle FM for Fresh Waves and the podcasts anytime you like at freshwaves.ca. I'm your host, Bren Masson. Until next time, have a wonderful, wonderful night and day, everyone.